Quiet. Does that mean it's time? We're starting 2 minutes early. Is that all right? Is that allowed? All right.
We're making up for the 5 minutes we were late last week.
Were we 5 minutes late? Well, this will be good because I've got a lesson that's got 3 points, and I had planned 10 minutes on each point. So we'll have 2 minutes for y'all to comment. Just kidding. So we're on our third of 5 lessons on Christian evidences, and our first 2, we took 2 classes to talk about how evolution/atheism cannot explain morality. It cannot explain the universe that we exist in, and it can't explain us. It can't explain our bodies, our beings. So we're going to take the next 2 lessons to talk about that, the human body. And of course, our body, as everything, is God's creation. But we want to think about this toward those who do not believe in God in order to help give them some evidence to make them think, so that we may be able to have a study with them and teach them. But first, we've got to make them understand why they're here and how they're here. So that's the first reason I think of for Christian evidences. And the second is for us to build our faith. We absolutely need to build our own faith and remind ourselves frequently of how important we are, how wonderful we are. We're only going to look at one scripture today, and then I'm going to go through a lot of things. A lot of this I didn't know or had forgotten, so I hope some of it is good for you and helps build your faith in our God as we look at the human body. So we're going to read Psalm. If you want to turn to Psalm 139, I'm going to read a few verses here, and you can follow along with me. We're going to use this scripture only, and then go forward looking at some points on the human body. So here in Psalm 139, verse 14, David, King of Israel, declares this. He said, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you." Now listen. "For I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well." So a couple of words here just to key on. David said, made. Made means created, designed. And truly, that's what we were. We were made. And then following, he says, marvelous are your works. Anything that's made requires work. Whoever made these benches put some work in. They didn't just come here. They didn't just show up here. Somebody made them. There was work involved. So David mentioned this long time ago, and since then we've had about 3,000 years of scientific and medical advancement that absolutely demonstrates the accuracy of what he said. So as I mentioned last week, there couldn't be anything farther from the truth that it is religion versus science. If we look at true science and things that are absolute and exist, and we compare that to what the Bible teaches us, they line up every single time perfectly. So David made this comment, and we've had about 3,000 years of figuring some stuff out. We're still not that smart as humans, but we think we are. But we've had about 3,000 years to see what David said is absolutely right. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. So we want to talk about the human body. We talked, before we do that, we mentioned one law when we were talking about the existence of the universe, and we mentioned that laws are things that are we know they're true. They're science-based entities that are absolute, and they happen every single time. They're reproducible in whatever situation. So we talked about the second law of thermodynamics with the energy in this of our matter slowly decreasing. So that told us that what we see and what we live on has not existed forever, but it's slowly decreasing. That's a law. Another law to think about as we start looking at the body is the law of teleology. And I don't know what teleology is. Ology is the study of, so somebody who's smarter than me can tell me what teleo is. It's the study of something. This law of teleology states very simply that where there is design, there must be a designer. That's a law. Where there's design in anything, there's got to be a designer. That's a law. So in thinking about that, we want to look at, just today we'll look at 3 systems of our body, and then Lord willing, next Sunday we'll look at another 3. And we're going to start with the one that we see on each other, very outwardly. Our skin. What's that system called, those of you who remember biology? Huh? The epidermis is one of the layers of the skin. What's our system of our skin called? Starts with an I. Anybody remember that? Did y'all take biology? It's a weird word and we don't use it every day. Integumentary. Y'all remember that, don't you? That's the system of this. The integumentary system is our skin. So our skin. Now, I'm just going to go through some bullet items, and we'll pause very briefly on some of them maybe, but we're going to try to get 10 minutes with each system because we're getting these 3 systems in today. So we're starting with the skin. So some points. The skin is the largest organ of our body, and we don't often think about the skin as being an organ, but it's an organ. Now listen to some of this stuff. If I knew some of this, I forgot it. The skin of a 150-pound person spread out would cover 20 square feet and weigh 9 pounds. Our skin. 150-pound person, that's not very big. 300-pound person, I guess it'd be 40 square feet. No, that's not true because a lot of that's fat. But 150-pound person, normal size, 20 square feet, 9 pounds. Now listen to this. A piece of skin the size of a quarter, I should have brought a quarter for a prop. This size of skin, piece of skin, has 20, on average, they vary depending on what part of our body. On average has 25 nerve endings in there, 100 sweat glands. That's why we sweat so much during the summer. There's 100 of them in that. And listen, more than 3 million cells. So this little piece of skin, 25 nerve endings, 100 sweat glands, 3 million cells. Our outer layers of skin are constantly being replaced. Off with the old, on with the new. Now, just think for a moment. What man-made house or entity replaces its own covering constantly? We've got to replace our roofs every now and then. That doesn't do it itself. I wish it would because mine's like this and I'm not getting up there. Somebody's going to have to do mine. But what have we created that can replace its own covering? Just for thought. Some other stuff about the skin. The skin, of course, on the palm of our hands and the soles of our feet have these little friction surfaces. And that comes in pretty handy, don't it? If we didn't have all these little ridges, if my hand was the same as my arm, I wouldn't be able to pick anything up. We'd all have to wear gloves with those things on them. But that's how we are. Does that come in handy, that we've got friction and differences on our feet? Of course it does. Would we call that a great design? Of course. Design dictates a designer. This didn't just happen. That didn't just happen. Another thing, super important, our skin is a protective layer that keeps bacteria away from the inside of our body. It's like a little barrier, armor. Huh? Yeah. Without our skin, you take a large wound on somebody. If somebody's got a wound this big, what's the primary concern always? Infection. It's open for infection because there's no skin there. Yeah, it's a protective space suit or hazmat suit, whatever. And we've all got it. So the skin's a protective barrier that keeps bacteria from entering our body. Thing we don't think about very much. Our skin is waterproof, is a waterproof wall that keeps our fluids in. Considering we're about 75% fluid, do you think that's a pretty good idea that it stays inside us? Is that a design? Of course it is. The skin, not only does it keep stuff out, it keeps stuff in. And if we didn't have skin, our fluids would leak out. When people get severe burns, the two biggest problems is fluid loss and severe dehydration and infection, because the skin's gone, so stuff can get in and stuff gets out. And that's why people who have severe burns a lot of times don't make it. So our skin's wonderful, waterproof. It also protects our insides a little bit. There's stuff right under our skin that the skin is really the only protection for. If you think about how soft we are down here, the skin protects our interior parts. Now listen to this. About 1/3 of our blood circulates through our skin. I didn't know that. So 1/3 of our total blood that our body uses is for our skin. This is to help us maintain our body temperature. Is it pretty important that our body temperature stays consistent? What happens if our body temp goes up by just 7 or 8 degrees and stays there for a while? 7 or 8 degrees. Now, if we had a temperature increase outside of 7 and 8 degrees, we don't even notice that. It goes from 70 to 78. You might feel a little bit warmer, but our temperature is real important, and our skin, the blood circulating through our skin like a little radiator, keeps our temperature where it needs to be. Our skin absorbs ultraviolet rays from the sun and then converts them to vitamin D. And we got to have vitamin D. When we get vitamin D is necessary for us to use calcium. If we don't have vitamin D in our body, we're not able to use calcium. So people can take tons of calcium pills, but if you don't have enough vitamin D, it can't be used. So in essence, our skin is a little chemical processing plant too, converting vitamin D and helping us be able to use calcium. Those are just a few of the things I wrote down about the skin. I literally did want us to spend about 10 minutes on each one, but our skin, that's amazing, all those things. And we don't think about our skin unless we cut it or sunburn it or whatever. It just does its thing. Pretty good design. Had to be a designer. Skeletal system. Let's start about that. How many bones do you think we have? That's exactly right. The average person. Now, if you're not average, you could have an extra rib or you could be missing a bone here or there, but an average adult, if you're average, you got 206 bones roughly. Now, kids have little kids have more. They have a lot more bones, but a lot of them fuse as they age. But about 206 bones, and they serve primarily as our support system. They're like the frame of a house. When you're putting up the structure that's going to hold everything up. Our bones are strong enough to support our weight and the activities that we're doing through our lives, but they're also flexible enough to absorb shock and allow us all kinds of movement. So our bones are just about perfect. Now, younger folks' bones are more flexible. As we get older, they're not quite as flexible, and that's one reason we have more fractures when we're 80 than when we're 8. But very strong, support us, allow us to have lots of movement because of the joints. But they do bend and move to give us some flexibility there. Hmm? Yeah, that's one. Remember what Mark said there? That's one of our points on our bone, that very amazing thing that he just mentioned, regenerate. But bones protect our soft organs. What's inside this bone structure that's pretty important on most of us? Well, studies have shown that most people have a brain. It may not be connected. Aren't you glad you got a skull? How many times have you hit your head and, that big thick skull protects the brain? It's really great that our bones protect our soft organs. Our brain is super important. God gave us a helmet, a super strong helmet basically to support us. Our inside organs, our rib cage supports some very important things. Our spine and our rib cage, it protects our spinal cord, our liver, our lungs, our heart, and other things. When you think about all those structures, could they survive on their own without protection? They're soft. If our liver was here on the outside of our arm, it wouldn't last till we're 6 years old. We would rupture it, destroy it. But we've got this cage that is designed to protect all these internal organs. And all those organs are important. That's a pretty good design. Another thing about our bones store about 99% of our calcium in our body. So the calcium that we need is stored in our bones. So without our bones, we wouldn't have calcium. And without calcium, none of the nerves would work because nerves need calcium to help provide the impulses. So calcium's important. Our bones store it, and that allows our nerves to work. And also, without calcium, our blood wouldn't clot. So if we didn't have bones to store calcium, we wouldn't be able to move or feel. We'd just be a blob, and we'd bleed to death. So we'd be a blob that would be bleeding to death, all because without bones. Bones store calcium. Calcium does this. Calcium does that. So that's a great design.
And magnesium helps that calcium to get into your bones.
Yes, it does. So without the magnesium, everything's like this. Aren't we so lucky that all that stuff just happened over billions of years? That's amazing. I'm being sarcastic. Is it just been one?
You know that the amount of stress that the human body can take because of skeletal construction is incredible.
Oh, absolutely. Breaking a bone's horrible, but it would be worse if you got a chunk of your liver torn. So breaking a few ribs, while it can be painful, or a fractured skull, if it does its job in protecting. 180 million red blood cells die every minute. So while you've been sitting here in class, you can do the math. We've been going about 16 minutes. 180 million red blood cells die on average every minute. The platelets for those red blood cells, as well as some of the white blood cells, originate where? Remember, we're talking about bone. Bone marrow. So without our bone marrow, we wouldn't have platelets. Without platelets, we wouldn't have red blood cells. So our red blood cells would die out, and then we'd be gone. That'd be the end of it. But thankfully, our design is such that our bone marrow produces the platelets and white blood cells, and we keep on ticking. When a bone's broken, it immediately starts to repair itself. It starts knitting immediately. Now, sometimes there needs to be help. If fractures are horrible, they have to pull them back together, put some metal there to hold it in place or whatever. But that bone starts knitting immediately. So, one question we can have for our atheist, evolutionist friends that we encounter, please explain how just that process happened by some non-intelligent force. How did something just come to be like a bone that will repair itself immediately, starts fixing itself? Let me read. I've got a book that I'm getting some of these stats from, and there's a couple of quotes here. This one I want to read. So while we're here on the bone, I just want to read this. Who was this dude that wrote this? Let me think. Let me read through here real quick. I don't know. Some of these quotes are by atheists, which makes them even more astounding, some of the things they say. But listen to this, and it's true. Perhaps an engineer will someday develop a substance as strong and as light and efficient as bone, but what engineer could devise a substance that, like bone, can grow continuously, lubricate itself, requires no shutdown time, and repairs itself when it's damaged? Good question. You know what the answer is? Nothing. And the point is, maybe someday this can be designed. But as of now, our bones do all that, and we don't even think about our bones. Let's go on with bones, or we're not going to get. We got to get to the muscle system, because our muscles are important, and that's what's going to carry us out of here in a little bit, and probably somewhere to eat. To recharge. A fourth of our bones are in our feet. Our feet have about a fourth of our bones. They're small. But let's think about just the feet for a second. So about a fourth of our bones are there, little bones. Our foot bones form an arch. What's an arch? What design do engineers do? What do they create from an arch typically? For strength. Bridge. Arches for strength. Our feet have arches in them that gives us strength. They've got to be strong. That gives the bones strong. They've got to be strong because we're on them all the time. So our foot bones create an arch, which engineers know is great for strength. They also operate as levers. Think about when you're pushing the gas pedal. It's like a lever. Some of you need to hit the brake sometimes too. I don't want to ignore this side. A lever, so a bridge, an arch, a lever. They also act like hydraulic jacks. When we do this, that's a hydraulic jack, jacking me up on my tiptoes. They act as a catapult when we jump. I'm not going to jump. I used to be able to jump. That's the first thing that goes. But that's a catapult, hydraulic jack, catapult. They also act as a cushion and a shock absorber because that arch will do this. Chunk, chunk, chunk. It gives. So when we walk and run, we've got a shock. So our feet are shock absorbers, a little catapult, a hydraulic jack, a lever, and the arch, like you would see for a bridge for strength. Very nice design. And that's helpful because you will, if you live a normal lifetime, you're going to log about 65,000 miles on your feet. Now, some of us here have been around the world. Most of us have not. 65,000 miles is 2.5 times, y'all. So in your average lifetime, you're going to do 2.5 times around the world. Good thing those feet do that, right? Or we would have to be pushed or carried through. All right, we got to go on. On bones.
Vertically, right? So the feet keep this vertical shape from falling over.
Yes, it does.
All the animals,
That's a good point. Let me go back to bones 1 second, Mark. That's a good point. What does our big toe do? Anything? You lose your big toe. Yes, you do. I've seen a lot of folks over the years had to have that amputated, and there's no getting it back. That big toe. It keeps it. Our bones keep us upright. Our feet do all these things for us, but that big toe controls. It's amazing how much of our balance it controls. So that's a quick thing on bones. So let's go on the muscle system. Does anybody know how many muscles we have on average? Take a guess. Lots. Correct. We've got about 600 muscles. And when you add all those muscles up, that's about 6 billion fibers, because every muscle's got muscle fibers, little fibers making up the muscle. So 600 muscles, 6 billion fibers. They're our engine. Now, have you ever seen an engine of any kind, just a little simple one, just kind of develop itself? Just all of a sudden, one day, there's a little engine here. I've never even seen one of those little small model engines. When I was little, we used to have models of a combustion engine. They were transparent. It was pretty cool. You could see that little thing could make itself. That little pathetic plastic model. So our muscles are an engine. We've never seen any engine develop its own. So let's go through some quick things on muscles. Muscles work by contracting, and when they contract, they shorten. That's all, a muscle either shortens or it goes back to its own length. That's all it does. And some of them work in pairs. Like, just think about your elbow. When this muscle contracts, it pulls your arm up. And when it contracts, this one back here, your tricep, has to relax. If you've got this and this both firing at the same time, you can't move your arm. So if we were to put electric stimulator on your bicep and on your tricep and firing them both equally, you wouldn't be able to bend that arm at all because this would prevent it. But it's amazing how when our brain tells this one to move up, to contract, this one relaxes so we can eat. We can do whatever. Contract, relax. Everywhere we move, everything that happens, they work together in pairs. When one works, others rest. And sometimes it's multiple. It's like a little concert. This is playing, and there is a conductor. Who's that conductor? God designed. There has to be a design. There has to be a designer with a design. But those muscles work in correlation. When we open our mouth, certain muscles work to open them, and certain muscles work to close. Some of us have stronger opening muscles than we do closing muscles. But it's amazing. It's amazing how the muscles work, and it does it like this. It does it like this. We don't have to. That's true. The tongue is a little beast. But think about the muscle. Each muscle has its own supply of fuel. So you think of a motor, that engine's got to have fuel. Our body takes the food we eat and converts it into something called glycogen that fuels our muscles. So this glycogen goes to our muscles, and it's there stored. So when we need to do this, we can do it. Do you have to go to a pump and refill your muscles very often with glycogen? Of course not. It occurs. We eat, our body makes it into the fuel, sends it to the muscles, and we work. We don't have to think about it. We got to pull up to the gas station and pump gas in our car unless you've got an electric one. But we have to refuel our engines, our motors that we've created. But ours just works perfectly. We eat, converts it, it works. Now, those of you who know a little bit about a car engine, and those of you who don't, you're going to a little bit. Think about our engine of muscle like the combustion engine in a car. There's fuel that goes into the car, gas and air, and then there's a spark plug there that ignites that fuel and converts it into energy. There's a little explosion that occurs, and it converts it into energy that spins mechanism in the block, and then it feeds the rest of the vehicle. But there's a process that happens there, and we marvel when man first created the combustion engine. It was a marvel, like, hey, we can cause this little explosion. It'll spin this thing, and it'll turn these wheels. But that's kindergarten level. As amazing as that combustion engine is, it's kindergarten level to our muscles. And while we're talking about engines, we've never seen any car engines just happen. Engineers are constantly looking to try to improve that and make it work more efficiently, have a little more horsepower, get a little better gas mileage, tweak it, make it electric, all that. But we've never seen a car engine just happened, and we never will. But yet, some would want to think that this muscle system, our engine, just happened. Muscles work hand in hand with bones. The system we just talked about. The muscles connect to the bones, allow us to move. It's amazing how that works together. Everything goes as a system. In his book, there was an evolutionist named William Beck, and I don't know how old his book was. I've never read it, but don't plan on it. But in his book, he could hardly contain himself when writing about what he called the intricate structural organization of the muscles and the tendons of our hand. He was astounded at our hand, this evolutionist. He was just almost gleeful when talking about the muscles and tendons of our hand. These are capable of a huge variety of actions. Our hands can do amazing things. We have a thumb that allows us to do all kinds of things that animals can't. God made us different. Any good scientist knows well that the words he used, intricate structural organization. This is an atheist, evolutionist. He used the term intricate structural organization, and that's a good that defines our hand. But any good scientist knows that an intricate structural organization indicates design, and design demands a designer. However, he and others forget these kindergarten scientific principles, because here's what he remarked later. He just laid it out perfectly. It is an intricate structural organization, and any scientist would know that demands design and a designer. But here's what he said. He forgets all this stuff when he later remarks, the hand is one of evolution's most remarkable achievements. Dude, you was doing so well. You was doing so well. But you go to that? The hand is one of evolution's most remarkable. Just think about the hand. The hand is remarkable. But what's more remarkable is people that can say that with literally a straight face and with an intellectual face. Well, you do know. Huh? It's a huge false claim that just takes an infinite amount of faith to say that. We would call it something other than that. But how much do you have to write off to say one thing? It is an intricate, structural, organized thing, and then to say, wow, it's one of evolution's most remarkable achievements. Let me go on. This is a comment that was made that I do want to read. It is the epitome of gullibility, and I added voluntary stupidity. So it's the epitome of gullibility and a little bit of voluntary stupidity to think that an ingenious device such as the hand came about from some lucky quirks in nature, turning some kind of a fish fin into this. See what my hand's doing? Could a fin do that? Yes, we are so blessed to have that thumb. But it's very gullible, and it's voluntary stupidity, I think, from people who want to feel that way. All right, listen to this quote from two evolutionists. And when you listen to this, ask yourself, how can any true scientist echo these sentiments, these first sentiments, and then still cling to their evolutionary stand? So let me read this. This was two evolutionists that combined to write a book. So here we go. This is what they said. Only man can combine muscle with intelligence and imagination, plan and purpose to plow and plant a field, to create a museum masterpiece, or the Gettysburg Address, and only man trains to perform the most highly coordinated forms of bodily motion for their own sake in the expressive and athletic arts. We applaud this skill in our species Every time we clap our hands for a ballerina or a circus performer, how true. Oh, that's true. But then how can you cling to your evolutionary stand the next sentence? I'm not going to read. This is just one quote from the book. They're very aware of how wonderful and marvelous and fearfully we're made, but they refuse to acknowledge the design and designer part. And that's it. I'm sorry, I took y'all's 2 minutes.
That makes something else more supreme than this.
It absolutely does, and we mentioned that. That's one.